And anytime you don't know where you are or what you're supposed to be doing in this course, if you go to assignments, it has everything that you needed to have done. So there's a whole bunch of video lectures. Some of these lectures are only 5 minutes long, so it doesn't take long to watch them. And then, you know, reading assignments, Zoom lectures. Here's a discussion question that you'll need to answer by September 21st. That's next Tuesday. And some of you have already done it, but I'll just show it to you. Most of early Native American literature is based on the concept of myth. Please discuss the concept of myth as academic scholars define it, not as the general public defines it. What is the meaning of myth? What is the setting? Who are the characters? How does myth function in a culture? So you may remember that most of the Native American Indian culture was oral, and especially it was based on myth, and myth is based on sacred stories that tell how the world began. For example, for Christians in Genesis, you know, it says the world was created in 7 days, and it talks about the Garden of Eden and all that. But in Native American culture, you know, the world was created on the back of a turtle. You know, there was a Earth Mother, and she was giving birth, and she sank down to the lower levels, and there were a lot of monsters and things there. And they were trying to find a place for her to give birth, so they piled dirt on the top of a turtle, and then she climbed up and gave birth. And in the Native American Iroquois culture, that is how the earth began. And so it's a sacred truth. You know, the people who lived at that time had this belief. And if you believe in something, then for you, it's true. You know, so we have to respect every culture's beliefs. Who are we to question what someone else believes? So that's why we say myth is a sacred story. It's not a falsehood because we're respecting that culture. All right, so there's your discussion question. It's due on September 21st. All right, so now let's get back to the assignments. Anybody have any questions so far? Is everybody on top of that? Okay. This is the hard part, you know, about teaching, is that when you're in the classroom, you can see people nodding and you can hear them, but here, you know, I'm seeing the top of your head, or I'm not seeing you at all. So it's kind of sad. Here were the readings today. The only thing that we're going to go over is John Smith's General History of Virginia. And if you didn't have the book, here is a copy that you could have read. The only problem with this copy is that it's written in Old English. I mean, it's written before dictionaries stabilized the readings. So everything is spelled every which way, you know, extreme, weakness, sickness. You know, they just spelled it the way it sounded. And, you know, it was only till Samuel Adams, you know, created a dictionary that the spelling stabilized. I'm going to be speaking from the book today, but I'm going to try to give you the page numbers. Here are the page numbers on this online version, page 45. So anyway, as we go along and do the readings, I'm going to be speaking from the book, but I'll try to tell you what page number it's on. First of all, I just wanted to tell you about John Smith. He was such an interesting character. And by the time he was in his early 20s, he had already had such an amazing career that you could write novels and novels about it. But anyway, when John Smith was, did I hear a question? Okay, when John Smith was 16 years old, we're talking 16. All of you are more than 16. When he was 16, he was really tired of living on his parents' farm. He thought it was too boring. He wanted to get out and see the world. So he signed up for a soldier and kind of like a mercenary soldier, and he went off to the Netherlands to help Netherlands gain their independence from Spain. So, and then after that war was over, then he went to Austria to help the Austrians fight against the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire at one time, you know, controlled most of East and West Asia. And now, I mean, now people think of the Ottoman Empire as being based in Turkey. But anyway, he went to Austria and he fought the Turks. And it's claimed that in one battle, in one single combat, he cut off the heads of 3 Turkish soldiers. He beheaded them in one fight, 3 soldiers. So he received, you know, some big medal from England for having done this, and he was given a coat of arms for his family. And on the coat of arms, he has the 3 heads of the soldiers that he beheaded on his family coat of arms. And he wore that very proudly, you know, and he was only a teenager, you know, he had this, you know, big award from England. Well, then he was kidnapped by the people in the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, and then he was sold as a slave. And he was then put on a block and auctioned, and he was bought by a Turkish nobleman who bought him as a play trinket for his mistress. You know, maybe he was too busy to take care of his mistress, so he bought John Smith to take care of his mistress. Well, he then, you know, was living a very luxurious life. You know, he was the toy boy of this very rich Turkish woman who, by the way, fell in love with him. And he would have had, you know, he could have spent the rest of his life right there, you know, as the boy toy of this really rich person. But he accidentally made a mistake, and her brother was teaching him martial arts. And in one of the trainings, which was really rigorous, he thought the brother was going to kill him. It was really just a real rigorous training. And so in what he thought was self-defense, he killed his lover's brother. And so then he was, you know, pretty much persona non grata. After that, he wasn't welcome there anymore. He escaped and was able to get back to England. So there he was, back in England, in his, about the age that most of you are right now. He was like in his early 20s. And then all of a sudden they had, you know, this expedition to go to America, you know, and colonize. Well, he wanted to lead the first expedition with the Mayflower, but they didn't choose him. They chose Miles Standish. So he was kind of upset about that. But it wasn't, you know, but a year or so, you know, that he was able to get on a ship to go to America. While he was on that ship, he was accused of mutiny. He was accused of trying to get the sailors to mutiny against the captain of the ship. And he was not successful in that attempt. And so after that, the captain you know, put him in the ship's jail to hold him, because as soon as they got to America, they were going to execute him. You know, they waited to get to America, you know, so that they could explain why they were going to execute him. So he was on the ship the whole time as a prisoner. And then when they arrived and they opened sealed orders from the king, and lo and behold, the sealed orders named him the leader, the new leader of Jamestown. This was a surprise, and you can't kill somebody who has just been authorized to be the leader of the colony by the king, your boss. So the ship captain had to let him go. And then here we have John Smith in his early 20s. He's captain of Jamestown. When he arrived at Jamestown, it was in very poor shape. People were starving to death. You know, many people had already died of starvation. And so for the 2 years that he was there, he led them. You know, he was considered a very strict and stern captain. He said, if you don't work, you don't eat. So everybody had to work planting food, and he actually, you know, saved the colony through his strictness. So he was a good leader, and if it had not been for him, then Jamestown would have totally perished. But while he was there, he went out and made some forays, and during that time, he was captured by Native Americans, and from his writings, this is where we get the story of Pocahontas. He eventually was forced to leave Jamestown, even though he had brought it back to prosperity. There's always, you know, rivalry and fights and stuff, and so he got in trouble. I'm going to jump to the end real fast to tell you that one of the reasons that he had to go back to England finally, you know, there were people who hated him because he had been so strict. And so one day he was out on a boat, and someone put some gunpowder in a packet on his lap while he was sleeping. And then probably someone threw a match right in his lap, and he was severely injured. He didn't die, you know, but he probably wouldn't be able to have children after this. I mean, I don't know why I'm laughing, because that was a terrible thing to happen. But anyway, after that, he went back to England, and he never came back. But he spent his time in England writing about what happened to him. All right. In the textbook, I'm on page 56, and on the screen, this is kind of hard to read because of the misspelling, and also they didn't have the convention of paragraphing, so it's kind of hard to keep up, but I'm going to do my best this first part talks about, he's talking about how bad it was at Jamestown when he got there. And when he got there, the people were so weak because they were starving to death that they could hardly stand up. They could hardly go out in the field and work all day. But he pushed them, even though they were weak. He pushed them. It might be like football coaches pushing players who are not really strong enough to be out there, but they have to get out there anyway. He buried 50 people, you know, right after he got there. And then they got some food from the Indians. The Native Americans brought them food, and they ate it, and so things were starting to get better. Here on down at the bottom somewhere, he says everything of worth is found full of difficulties. That's so true. Anything that you do that's worthwhile, it takes hard work to overcome it. And so he spent all of his time searching for food and planting food. Um, Now, if you go on to page 45, it might be around here in 44 or 45, but he got into some trouble. He was meeting with some Indians, and they had brought him food, and but they didn't agree with something that he wanted, and they got into an argument. And so he let fly his musket, which means he just shot, and happened to scare all of them. I don't know if he killed anybody or not, but anyway, he was pretty loose with his gun. Hello? Someone have a question? Okay. If you have noise in your background, you might want to mute yourself so that the noise doesn't come through. All right. Then again, a bunch of Native Americans came and hung around him, and they were all dressed in their battle dress. And it says, and in this manner, being well armed with clubs, targets, bows, and arrow, they charged the English that so kindly received them with their muskets loaded with pistol shot. So he's constantly getting into skirmishes with the Native Americans. He make peace, and then recklessly make war, and it just went back and forth, and I'm sure they finally got tired of him. On here, we're still on page 45, and it talks about how they're still living hand to mouth. And then he discovered that some of the men there who got on the ship, he was going out, to explore, to find food, but they were preparing to go back to England. And so he, with his gun, he forced them to stay or sink in the river. And this cost the life of Captain Kendall. Captain Kendall lost his life in that, skirmish between the explorers from England. So he said, these brawls are so disgustful. Let me see if I can find that here. Somewhere on this page, it says these brawls are so disgustful, and some will say that they were better forgotten. Yet all men of good judgment will conclude it were better their baseness should be manifest to the world than the business bear the scorn and shame of the excused disorders. All right. I think that now we're moving on to your page 46. So let me scoot it down here. Let's see where we're at. I'm so sorry, this is hard to see, but I hope you have your textbook. In the textbook, we're now on page 59. Then he got, into a fight with Spaniards. The Spaniards loved gold, and he accused them of loving gold more than food. He was focused on getting food, but they were, trying to find the 7 golden cities. And then he talked about how in the fall, here we are right here, there was so much food just at the pond, swans, geese, ducks, and cranes, that we daily feasted with good bread, Virginia peas, pumpkins, and all kinds of things. Um, so they weren't too hungry at that time. Um, then he, the next voyage, he was going out to look for food, and they they stopped by the shore, and he told his people to stay in the boat, do not get out of the boat. And then he and two Native Americans went out to see what kind of food they could find. Uh, but when they got off the boat, well, then some of the other men followed him off the boat, after he was too far to stop them. And they surprised the Native Americans. And so again, two people were killed. Um, and then he was beset with 200 savages surrounding him, and he was kidnapped, and um, and he was the only survivor. They killed all the rest, and then they took him. Here it says 2 men slain. Um, but anyway, um, he was thoroughly abused, and then they, let's see, we're still on page 46, yeah. Well, anyway, all his men were slain, and then this is when he was taken prisoner, taken into the camp where the chief and everybody was, and then he gave the chief a compass, and the chief was so fascinated by that compass uh, that he spared Smith's life. They were preparing to kill him. They were going to build a big fire and tie him to the center and killed him. But just as they were about to shoot him, the king held up the compass and, said, well, let's not kill him. So then they took him to another place, and, 3 Native Americans holding him as they walked to another place. And at this time, there was a big ritual where Native Americans were in a ring, and they were dancing, and they were hooping and hollering and screeching. He calls it hellish notes, and he was pretty sure, every moment he was pretty sure he was going to be put to death, and how he survived it, who knows. But anyway, he was guarded, but they gave him lots of food. They gave him so much food, enough food for 12 people, he couldn't eat it all. So then, they were playing with him and putting all the food in baskets and tying it to his head and his arms, kind of just having fun with him. And then he would have, he's expecting to die any moment. And now on page 47, they would have slain him at one point, but one of the guards prevented it because he had helped the son on the deathbed of his son. So he survived then. And then he was taken, again to Jamestown. And as all the natives came, everybody fled. And again, he thought he was going to be killed. And it talks about here, well, we said these hellish notes. Let's see. Let me go further. Here's about the guard preventing the slaying. And then here we are on page 48. Let's see. Now, right here is where we are. Not long after, in the morning, a great fire was made in a longhouse. And again, they were doing some kind of ceremony. and they everybody um, uh, they had like a witch doctor, and he was all painted over with coal and oil and snakes and weasel skins, and you know, they did a dance around the circle, and then more devilish looking characters came out, and then they all had rattles and they began a song, you know. So it's a big kind of ritual leading up to what he figured this is leading up again to his death. uh, and then but they didn't kill him, and then they brought him a bag of gunfire, um, and then they carefully preserved that. And I think it's funny, he said, to plant as they did their corn, because they would be acquainted with the nature of that seed. So this is him being clever in his writing. You know, they were going to plant the gunpowder in his body, you know, with a shotgun. By the way, let me stop for just a minute and ask a question. All of this about James Smith is written in third person. Like, James Smith did this, he did that. Even though this article, even though this thing was published and it says by John Smith, you know, isn't it always weird when someone talks about themselves in third person? You know, instead of saying I, then he's talking about himself, but he's saying he, John Smith. Why do you think he did that? Can anybody tell me a reason why someone would write in third person about themselves? Hello? Well, the reason why is because he can make himself look better. You know, he can say how brave John Smith was, how smart he was, how he was totally selfless. He didn't do anything for himself. He made sure everybody was fed before he was fed. He only fired his gun by accident. You know, what a good person John Smith is. Uh, you know, in many cultures, like England and Japan, it's not considered nice to brag about yourself. You know, in America, we brag about ourselves all the time. But in other cultures, that's not such a worthy trait to have. So he could talk about himself in third person, whereas he wouldn't be able to do that in first person. All right. Then he's invited to go to a king's house, um, and again they make him a big robe of raccoon skins, and he's set in a room surrounded by 16-year-old wenches, and they're and this is at the home of Powhatan. Powhatan is the chief of the Powhatan tribe. And by the way, he has a daughter named Pocahontas. And Pocahontas is 10 years old. She's a preteen. And then at one point, Powhatan was getting ready to kill John Smith. And it says at the bottom of page 48, let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, right here. Then as many could laid hands on him and dragged him to them, and thereon laid his head, and being ready with their clubs to beat out his brains, Pocahontas, the king's dearest daughter, remember she's 10 years old, when no entreaty could prevail, put his head in her arms and laid her own upon his to save him from death. Whereat the emperor was contented he should live to make him hatches, and her bells of bead and copper. So he escaped death. This, right now in America, we have this whole legend story about Pocahontas. We have the Disney movie and the whole thing. It all comes from this sentence, one sentence about Pocahontas. And it's funny, this was, the first thing that he wrote that mentioned Pocahontas. Uh, but later, one of his men married Pocahontas and then took her back to England, and she became kind of famous in England. And then only then did John Smith do some more writing and elaborate, on this story of Pocahontas. So we don't really know if, all this story is really true or not. Um, you know, that she had saved him, because after all, she didn't marry him. She married another one of his people, later, probably when she was 16. By the way, she died at a very young age in England. So anyway, this is the story of Pocahontas, which is just built out of this one sentence in American literature from John Smith's History of Virginia. That's what we're reading right now, is Virginia, the history of Virginia. The General History of Virginia is the exact title, and that's where the Pocahontas story come from. And then he was now, after all this, and then James Smith finally got back to Jamestown and with his people. So after everything that he's been through, then his own people, the people whom he saved by making them work so that they could eat, they decided they wanted to kill John Smith by Levitical law. So in Leviticus, in the Bible, it says if you kill someone, then you should lose your life. And so they still blamed him for the death of Captain Kendall. Remember, Captain Kendall was trying to get off that boat, and he lost his life. So they wanted him to pay for that. There is one more, let's see, one more sentence about Pocahontas. Let me see if I can find it here. Thus from being numbest death. Let's see. All right, his relation of the plenty he had seen. So revived their dead spirits, especially the love of Pocahontas, that all men's fear was abandoned. But anyway, thus you may see what difficulties still crossed any good endeavor. So no matter what he did, he seemed to be in danger and peril of losing his life. Well, then the terrible accident happened, and he was forced to go back to England to live for the rest of his life. So that's what we looked at today, was from the General History of Virginia. He also had another little short writing, another book that he wrote about when he said farewell to Virginia. And then there was one other, let me go back to the, see if I can get back to the readings. There was one other work that he wrote. We're not going to go over it, but I'm just going to tell you, let me get one brief fact about it. Let me get here. Internet seems to be, let's assignments, reading assignment. Okay. Um, his farewell to Virginia, and then a description of New England. So this was a book that he wrote, and it was purely PR, promotional, trying to get people to sign up and get on the boat and go to New England. And he, can anybody tell me what New England is? You often hear about New England, but what is New England? Okay, it's Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. Those are the 6 states that make up New England. You know, particularly beautiful part of America, beautiful fall foliage, you know, great place to take a fall vacation. But anyway, he describes, you know, how wonderful it is in New England, and how people, if they move there, they could get rich and have wonderful lives. So that's what this is about. All right, that concludes what I had wanted to talk about today. Do any of you have any comments or questions? Now that we've gone over this, then I will be able to put up your first major assignment, and that should be up in the next day or two. You'll have 2 or 3 weeks to get that done. But anyway, be looking for that, and be sure that you're staying caught up with your assignments. Don't forget to do your myth discussion question, and you know, we're just moving right along. I hope you're finding this first part of New England literature interesting. We're in the age of explorers right now. John Smith was an explorer and a colonist. So, you know, he kind of falls into 2 categories, but what an amazing life he had. And, you know, he went back to England when he was 28 years old. Look at how much he had already done in his whole life, you know, from fighting in the Netherlands and Austria and being captive as a love toy in Turkey, and then, you know, being accused of mutiny, and then being appointed the governor of the colony, and then, you know, his 2 years of hard life trying to save Jamestown, which he did, being captured and transferred from one tribe to another, being saved by a 10-year-old girl named Pocahontas, from whom we have a whole mythical legend evolved in America. This story, based on, you know, 1 or 2 sentences that he wrote. Later, he wrote more, you know, but only because it seemed like a popular topic at the time. All right, that's all for today. Bye, everybody.